They sold my dream car to help my sister start a business, so I bought the land her store rents. The first time I saw that 1967 Mustang Fastback, I was 12 years old, standing in my neighbor's driveway with my mouth hanging open like I'd never seen a car before. The afternoon sun was hitting the Highland green paint just right, making it look like liquid metal, and the chrome bumpers gleamed so bright they hurt to look at. Mr. Peterson was under the hood, tinkering with something, grease stains on his work shirt, and a satisfied smile on his weathered face. "She's a beauty, isn't she?" he said, noticing me staring. 1967 Mustang Fastback, same model Steve McQueen drove in Bullitt. I didn't know who Steve McQueen was back then, but I knew I was looking at the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. The way the car sat low and aggressive, the muscular lines of the body, the promise of power just waiting to be unleashed. It was like falling in love for the first time. Mr. Peterson let me sit behind the wheel that day, my small hands gripping the steering wheel while he told me about the 390 V8 engine, the 4-speed manual transmission, how she could go from 0 to 60 in under 7 seconds. "Someday," I whispered to myself, running my fingers over the dashboard, "someday I'm going to have a car just like this." Mr. Peterson chuckled, but not in a mean way. "Well, son, if you want something bad enough and you're willing to work for it, dreams have a way of coming true." That was 18 years ago. 18 years of working every summer job I could find, saving every penny that didn't go toward school or basic necessities. 18 years of watching classic car prices climb higher and higher, of seeing dozens of Mustangs slip through my fingers because I was always just a few thousand short. 18 years of my family rolling their eyes every time I mentioned my obsession, as they called it. "It's just a car, Marcus," my mother would say, whenever I showed her a listing I'd found online. "Cars are supposed to get you from point A to point B. All this emotional attachment to a piece of metal is unhealthy." My sister Sarah was even less supportive. "You could buy a perfectly good used Honda for a quarter of what you're planning to spend on that ancient thing," she'd say, shaking her head. "Think of all the practical things you could do with that money instead." But they didn't understand. It wasn't just about transportation or even about the car itself. It was about proving to myself that I could achieve something I'd set my mind to, that I could turn a childhood dream into reality through nothing but determination and hard work. Every dollar I saved was a small victory, every sacrifice a step closer to that moment when I'd finally have the keys to my dream car in my hand. By the time I turned 30, I'd finally saved enough. $43,000 sitting in a dedicated savings account I'd opened specifically for this purpose. I'd found the perfect car too, a 1967 Mustang Fastback in Highland Green, just like Mr. Peterson's old car. Just like the one from Bullitt. The seller was an older gentleman in Arizona who'd restored it himself over the course of 15 years. Every photo he sent showed meticulous attention to detail, from the rebuilt engine to the pristine interior, to the flawless paint job that looked like it had just rolled off the factory floor. "She's been my baby for a decade and a half," he told me over the phone, his voice thick with emotion. "But my arthritis is getting worse, and I can't enjoy her the way she deserves anymore. I want her to go to someone who'll appreciate what she is." We'd agreed on the price, shaken hands over video call, and I was planning to fly to Phoenix the following weekend to complete the transaction and drive her home. I'd already arranged for the time off work, booked my flight, even started researching the best route for the drive back to Ohio. I was so close I could practically smell the leather seats and feel the rumble of that V8 engine beneath me. That's when Sarah showed up at my apartment on a Tuesday evening in March, tears streaming down her face and a folder full of business plans clutched in her hands. "Marcus, I need your help," she said, collapsing onto my couch like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. "I need it more than I've ever needed anything in my life." Sarah had always been the ambitious one in our family. While I was content with my steady job as a mechanical engineer, she'd bounced between career ideas like a pinball, marketing, real estate, freelance graphic design, online boutique management. Nothing ever seemed to stick, and she'd come to me for loans before, small amounts to help her through tough patches that she always eventually paid back. But this was different. This time, she was talking about opening her own specialty coffee shop in the trendy downtown district that was experiencing a massive revitalization. She'd found the perfect location, a corner spot in a restored 1920s building with huge windows and exposed brick walls. She'd researched suppliers, developed relationships with local roasters, even designed the layout and chosen names for signature drinks. "The numbers work, Marcus," she said, spreading papers across my coffee table with shaking hands. "I've run the projections a dozen times. With the foot traffic from the new residential developments and the office buildings going up, I could be profitable within 18 months. But I need $50,000 for startup costs. First year's rent, equipment, inventory, permits, all of it." I listened to her pitch, watched her eyes light up as she described her vision for creating a community gathering place that would become the heart of the neighborhood. Her passion was infectious, and I could see how much thought she'd put into every detail. But when she got to the part about needing $50,000, my stomach dropped. "Sarah, you know I don't have that kind of money just sitting around," I said carefully. "My savings are already committed to something else. Your car," she said, and the way she said it made my blood run cold. "Not the car or that Mustang you want, but your car." Like it was some frivolous luxury rather than something I'd been working toward for nearly 2 decades. "It's not just a car," I said, probably more sharply than I should have. "It's something I've wanted since I was 12 years old. Something I've sacrificed for, saved for, planned for. I'm literally buying it this weekend." Sarah's face crumpled, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I know how much it means to you, I do. But this is my chance, Marcus. This is my one shot at building something real, something lasting. If I don't move on this property now, someone else will snatch it up. And opportunities like this don't come along every day." The conversation went on for hours. Sarah painted pictures of family dinners in the cozy back corner of her cafe, of watching her build something successful after years of false starts, of how proud our parents would be to see her finally settled into something substantial. She talked about how cars depreciate while businesses can grow, how I could always find another Mustang, but she might never get another chance like this one. "Please," she said as she was getting ready to leave, gripping my hands like she was drowning and I was the only life preserver in reach. "Just think about it, okay? I'm not asking you to give me the money. I'm asking you to invest in my future, in our family's future. I'll pay you back with interest, I swear." After she left, I sat in my apartment staring at the photos of the Mustang on my laptop screen, my chest tight with a mixture of love and dread. I thought about calling the seller in Arizona, about going through with the purchase and just telling Sarah I was sorry but I couldn't help her. I thought about 18 years of waiting, of dreaming, of working toward this one goal that had kept me motivated through college, through career changes, through every disappointment and setback life had thrown my way. But I also thought about Sarah's tears, about the desperation in her voice, about how she'd always been there for me when I needed support. I thought about family loyalty and what it meant to have someone's back when everything was on the line. The next morning, I called the seller in Arizona and told him I had to back out of our deal. The disappointment in his voice was heartbreaking, but not nearly as heartbreaking as the sound of my own voice as I transferred $43,000 from my dream car fund into Sarah's business account. "You won't regret this," Sarah said, throwing her arms around me when I told her what I'd done. "I'm going to make you so proud, Marcus. I'm going to build something amazing." Standing there in her embrace, watching her face glow with relief and excitement, I tried to convince myself that I'd done the right thing. Family first, I told myself. Dreams could wait, but opportunities like this were once in a lifetime. Looking back now, I realized that was the exact moment when everything started to change between us. The exact moment when the foundation of trust and mutual respect that had defined our relationship for 30 years began to crack. I just didn't know it yet. Within 6 weeks, Sarah's Grind was open for business, featuring exactly the warm, inviting atmosphere she'd envisioned. And for those first few blissful months, it seemed like my sacrifice had been worth it. Sarah was happy. Our parents were proud. And I tried to focus on the satisfaction of having helped my sister achieve her dreams, rather than dwelling on the Highland Green Mustang that was probably sitting in someone else's garage by now. But somewhere deep in my chest, in a place I didn't like to examine too closely, a small seed of resentment had taken root. And as the months passed, as Sarah's success grew and my own dreams remained on hold, that seed began to grow into something much more dangerous. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 months after Sarah's Grind opened its doors. I was stopping by for my usual Friday afternoon coffee, partly to support Sarah's business and partly because I genuinely enjoyed seeing her in her element, commanding her small kingdom with confidence and skill I'd never seen her display in her previous ventures. The cafe was bustling with its usual mix of remote workers, college students, and neighborhood regulars. Sarah had created exactly what she'd promised. A warm, inviting space where people wanted to linger, where conversations flowed as smoothly as the expertly crafted lattes. The exposed brick walls were lined with local artwork. Mismatched vintage furniture created cozy conversation nooks, and the sound of milk steaming and coffee grinding provided a comforting soundtrack to the gentle hum of human interaction. "The usual?" Sarah called out when she saw me approaching the counter, already reaching for a large cup to prepare my standard order. "Medium dark roast, black, no sugar." "You know it," I replied, pulling out my wallet. But Sarah waved me away with a flour-dusted hand. "Family discount," she said with a grin. "Besides, after everything you've done for me, the least I can do is keep you caffeinated." It was a sweet gesture, but something about the way she said it made me pause. There was an edge to her voice, something that sounded almost like guilt masquerading as gratitude. I was probably reading too much into it, I told myself. Starting a business was stressful, and Sarah had been working 14-hour days trying to establish her customer base and perfect her operations. I was waiting for my coffee when I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. "I can't believe how quickly this place took off," a woman at the table next to the counter was saying to her companion. "Sarah was telling me yesterday that she's already looking into opening a second location." "Really?" her friend replied. "That's amazing. Didn't she just open this place a few months ago?" 3 months exactly. She said the numbers have been even better than she projected. Something about the rent being lower than she expected, which gave her more cushion in the budget for quality ingredients and marketing. The rent being lower than expected. I felt my chest tighten as I processed those words. Sarah had told me she needed $50,000 for startup costs, with a significant portion of that going toward first year's rent on what she'd described as prime downtown real estate. If the rent was substantially lower than what she'd budgeted for, where had the rest of my money gone? When Sarah handed me my coffee, I tried to keep my voice casual. "Business is really booming, huh? I heard someone mention you're already thinking about expansion." Sarah's face lit up, but there was something forced about her enthusiasm. "Well, you know how it is. When you find success, you have to strike while the iron is hot. The numbers have been incredible, Marcus. Better than my most optimistic projections." "That's great," I said, taking a sip of coffee that suddenly tasted bitter despite being perfectly brewed. "I'm curious about something, though. What ended up happening with your rent situation? I remember you being really stressed about that cost." For just a moment, Sarah's smile faltered. It was barely perceptible, just a tiny crack in her confident facade. But I caught it. "Oh, I was able to negotiate a better deal than I initially thought. The landlord was motivated to get someone in there quickly." "How much better?" I pressed, hating myself for the suspicion creeping into my voice but unable to stop myself from asking. Sarah busied herself wiping down the already clean counter, avoiding my eyes. "Just better. Nothing dramatic. I should get back to work. The afternoon rush is about to hit." I left the cafe that day with more questions than answers, and a gnawing feeling in my stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. That night, I found myself doing something I'd never imagined I'd do. I started researching downtown commercial real estate prices, trying to figure out what Sarah might actually be paying in rent. What I discovered made me feel sick. The building where Sarah's grind was located had several other commercial spaces, and according to public records and real estate listings, the average rent for similar square footage was running about $1,500 less per month than what Sarah had told me she'd budgeted for. Over the course of a year, that was $18,000, a significant chunk of the money I'd given her. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Sarah had overestimated to build in a safety margin. Maybe she'd genuinely been surprised by her ability to negotiate. Maybe the difference was going toward equipment upgrades or higher quality inventory than she'd originally planned. There could be a dozen innocent explanations, but the doubt had taken root, and over the following weeks I found myself paying closer attention to things I'd previously overlooked, like the fact that Sarah had recently bought a new car, nothing extravagant, but a reliable late-model Honda that she'd mentioned getting a great deal on, like the way she'd started dressing more expensively, with designer jeans and handbags that definitely weren't in the budget of someone who'd just invested every penny into a new business. Like the fact that when I asked her about setting up a repayment plan for the money I'd lent her, she kept deflecting with vague promises of once things stabilize, and after the first-year numbers are in. The breaking point came 6 months after the cafe opened, at Sarah's birthday dinner at our parents' house. The whole family was there: Mom, Dad, our younger brother Jake, Sarah's boyfriend Ryan, and me. The conversation naturally turned to Sarah's business success, and our parents were practically glowing with pride as Sarah regaled them with stories of her growing customer base and positive reviews. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," Mom said, reaching across the table to squeeze Sarah's hand. "Starting your own business takes such courage, and to see it succeeding like this, well, I couldn't have done it without family support," Sarah said, glancing in my direction. "Marcus really came through for me when I needed it most." Dad nodded approvingly. "That's what family is for. We support each other's dreams." "Speaking of dreams," Ryan said, raising his wine glass, "Sarah told me she's already looking at potential locations for a second cafe, maybe even franchising eventually." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "Franchising? Sarah, we've never talked about expansion on that scale." Sarah's cheeks flushed slightly. "It's just preliminary research, Marcus. Nothing concrete. But when you have a successful model, it makes sense to explore growth opportunities." "But what about paying back the initial investment?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. "I mean, before we start talking about expansion, shouldn't we address the loan repayment?" The table went quiet. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, and I immediately regretted bringing up money at what was supposed to be a celebration. But I couldn't stop myself from continuing. "I'm just wondering about the timeline," I said, my voice getting tighter despite my efforts to stay calm. "It's been 6 months, and we haven't even discussed a repayment schedule." Sarah set down her wine glass with more force than necessary. "Marcus, we talked about this. I said I'd pay you back once the business was stable. It's only been 6 months, but you're talking about opening a second location," I said, my composure starting to crack. "If you have capital for expansion, surely you have something for repayment." "The expansion would be funded differently," Sarah said, her voice getting defensive. "Through investors, business loans, that kind of thing. That's completely separate from the $43,000 of my money that you used to start this business," I interrupted, no longer caring about keeping things civil. Mom gasped. "43,000? Marcus, honey, you never told us it was that much." I looked around the table at their shocked faces and realized that Sarah had downplayed the amount of my contribution to our parents. They'd probably assumed it was a few $1,000s. Not nearly my entire life savings. "You didn't tell them?" I asked Sarah, feeling betrayed all over again. "You didn't tell them that I gave up buying my dream car to fund your startup?" Sarah's face had gone pale. "Marcus, please, let's not do this here." "Do what here? Tell the truth about what happened?" My voice was getting louder, and I could see our parents exchanging worried glances. "Tell them how I'd saved for 18 years to buy a 1967 Mustang, how I had the deal lined up and ready to go, and how I gave up that dream to help you pursue yours. You made that choice," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't force you to do anything." "You're right," I said, standing up from the table. "I did make that choice. I chose to trust my sister. I chose to believe that family meant something. I chose to think that when you said you'd pay me back, you actually meant it." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, the sound of a car passing outside, my own heart pounding in my ears. "Marcus," Dad said finally, his voice careful and measured. "Son, maybe you should sit down and we can talk about this calmly." But I was beyond calm. 6 months of swallowed resentment, of watching Sarah's success built on the ashes of my dreams, of being treated like a silent partner in a business deal I'd never agreed to. It all came pouring out at once. "You want to know what the worst part is?" I said, looking directly at Sarah. "It's not even about the money anymore. It's about the fact that you've never once acknowledged what that sacrifice meant to me. You've never said thank you. Not really. You've never asked how I'm doing without the thing I worked for my entire adult life to achieve. You just took my money and built your dream on top of my broken one. And now you act like that was always the plan." Sarah was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I'd cried too, alone in my apartment, looking at photos of Mustangs I could no longer afford, mourning a dream that felt more distant now than it had when I was 12 years old. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to feel..." "Feel what?" I asked. Betrayed? Used? Like I don't matter as long as your business is thriving? I left the house that night with my family's shocked voices still echoing behind me. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel of my practical, reliable, utterly soulless sedan, and tried to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. That was the night I realized that Sarah wasn't going to pay me back. Not willingly, anyway. That was the night I understood that my $43,000 wasn't alone in her mind. It was a gift. A family contribution to her success that she felt entitled to keep. That was the night I started planning my revenge. The idea came to me 3 weeks later, in the most mundane way possible. I was sitting in my office during lunch break, mindlessly scrolling through commercial real estate listings while eating a sandwich at my desk. It had become an odd habit since the birthday dinner disaster, looking at properties for sale, calculating potential returns, fantasizing about having enough money to become the kind of investor who could actually make a difference in the world. That's when I saw it. Historic downtown building, prime commercial location, $380,000, owner motivated. The address made my heart stop. 247 Maple Street, the same address as Sarah's grind. With trembling fingers, I clicked on the listing. The photos showed the familiar red brick exterior, the large windows, the corner location that Sarah had described as perfect for foot traffic. According to the listing details, the building housed 4 commercial spaces on the ground floor and 2 residential lofts upstairs. The current owner, a man named Harold Brennan, was looking to sell quickly due to health concerns and desire to liquidate real estate holdings. I stared at my computer screen for a full 5 minutes, my sandwich forgotten, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't dare let myself fully consider. Then I picked up my phone and called the listing agent. Meredith Chen Real Estate, this is Meredith speaking. Hi. I'm calling about the listing for 247 Maple Street, the commercial building downtown. Oh, wonderful! Are you looking for an investment property? That building has excellent tenants and a solid rental history. My mouth felt dry. Can you tell me more about the current lease agreements? Absolutely. There are 4 commercial spaces, all currently occupied. The corner unit houses a coffee shop that just signed a 5-year lease 6 months ago. Very reliable tenant. Excellent credit. Business is thriving from what I understand. The other 3 spaces have various lease terms, all with responsible business owners. The building generates about $8,200 per month in rental income. $8,200 per month. I did quick math in my head. That was nearly $100,000 per year in rental income. On a $380,000 purchase price, it was an excellent return, especially in a revitalizing downtown area where property values were trending upward. What about financing options? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Well, that depends on your financial situation. For an investment property like this, most lenders want to see 20-25% down, good credit score, proof of income sufficient to cover the mortgage if the rental income disappeared temporarily. Do you have experience with rental properties? Some. I lied. Can I schedule a showing? Of course. How about tomorrow at 2 p.m.? I can meet you at the property and show you all the spaces. Go over the financials in detail. I hung up the phone and sat back in my chair, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was crazy. This was beyond crazy. I was a mechanical engineer, not a real estate investor. I had no experience being a landlord, no knowledge of property management, no idea what I was getting myself into. But I also had $67,000 in various savings accounts, money I'd managed to accumulate in the months since giving Sarah my dream car fund, partly from bonuses at work, and partly from the aggressive saving plan I'd adopted to try to rebuild toward another car purchase. With a 20% down payment, I'd need $76,000 plus closing costs, which meant I'd be a few thousand short, unless I took out a small personal loan to bridge the gap, or liquidated some of the stock options I'd been sitting on. Or, I stopped myself before I could go any further down that path. This was insane. I was talking about spending hundreds of thousands of dollars and taking on massive debt just to get back at my sister. It was petty, vindictive, and potentially financially ruinous. It was also, I realized as I sat there staring at the listing photos, absolutely brilliant. The next afternoon, I met Meredith Chen outside 247 Maple Street. She was a petite woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a firm handshake, the kind of person who radiated competence and no-nonsense professionalism. Beautiful building, isn't it? she said as we approached the front entrance. Harold Brennan bought it in 1987 and has maintained it beautifully. You can see the original brickwork, the restored cornerstones, all the period details that give it so much character. I nodded, trying to look like a serious investor, rather than someone contemplating an elaborate revenge scheme. What's Mr. Brennan's timeline for selling? He'd like to close within 60 days if possible. His health situation is requiring him to relocate to be closer to family, so he's motivated to move quickly. We started with the residential lofts on the second floor. Spacious, well-maintained apartments with high ceilings and lots of natural light. The tenants weren't home, but Meredith showed me through both units, pointing out recent updates to the kitchens and bathrooms, the original hardwood floors, the period fixtures that had been carefully restored. Then we moved to the commercial spaces. I'd been in 3 of the 4 many times. There was a vintage clothing boutique, a used bookstore, and a small accounting firm. But walking through them with an owner's eye was different. I found myself noticing things I'd never paid attention to before: the condition of the floors, the age of the electrical systems, the way natural light flowed through the spaces. Finally, we reached Sarah's grind. Mind if we take a quick look? Meredith asked. I know the owner, Sarah Morrison. She's done a wonderful job with the space. My chest tightened, but I nodded. We pushed through the familiar door, triggering the little bell that announced our arrival. It was mid-afternoon, so the coffee shop was relatively quiet. Just a few customers scattered around the tables, the soft hum of conversation mixing with indie folk music playing through the sound system. Sarah looked up from behind the espresso machine, and her face went through a series of expressions when she saw me: surprise, confusion, and then something that might have been worry. Marcus, what are you doing here? Before I could answer, Meredith stepped forward. Hi, Sarah. I'm Meredith Chen from Chen Real Estate. I'm showing Mr. Thompson through the building. He's a potential buyer. The color drained from Sarah's face. Buyer? The building's for sale, I said, my voice carefully neutral. I'm considering purchasing it as an investment property. Sarah stared at me for a long moment, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. She was smart enough to understand immediately what this could mean: that her little brother, the one she'd borrowed money from and hadn't paid back, might soon be in a position to control her business's future. Can we talk? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm in the middle of a showing, I replied. Maybe later. Meredith, seemingly oblivious to the tension crackling between us, was already moving toward the back of the cafe, commenting on the exposed brick walls and the efficient use of space. I followed her, acutely aware of Sarah's eyes tracking my every movement. This tenant has really maximized the potential of the space, Meredith was saying. The layout is perfect for a food service business, and as I mentioned, they just signed a 5-year lease. Very stable income stream. What are the terms of that lease? I asked, pulling out my phone to take notes. Standard commercial lease, $2,100 per month. Tenant responsible for utilities, normal wear and tear provisions. There's a renewal option built in, and the tenant has been exemplary. Always pays on time, maintains the space beautifully, no complaints from other tenants or neighbors. $2,100 per month. I did quick mental math. $25,200 per year. With the money I'd given her, Sarah could afford that rent for nearly 2 years without earning a single dollar from the business. No wonder she wasn't in any hurry to pay me back. We finished the tour 20 minutes later, stepping back out onto the sidewalk as Meredith locked up behind us. So, what do you think? She asked. Are you interested in making an offer? I looked back at the building, at the large windows of Sarah's cafe where I could see her moving around inside, probably trying to process what had just happened. Very interested, I said. What's the fastest we could move on this? Well, if you can get pre-approved for financing quickly, we could potentially have an offer in by Friday. Mr. Brennan is very motivated, and if your offer is competitive, I think we could be looking at a 30-day close. 30 days. In 30 days, I could own the building that housed my sister's business. In 30 days, I could become her landlord. Let me make some calls, I said. I'll be in touch tomorrow. That evening, I sat in my apartment with a legal pad, sketching out the financial implications of what I was considering. The numbers actually worked. Even with the mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs, the rental income would provide a decent return on investment. And in a gentrifying downtown area, the property value would likely appreciate significantly over the next few years. This wasn't just revenge, I told myself. It was a smart financial move that happened to put me in a position to demand what was owed to me. But even as I rationalized it, I knew the truth. This was absolutely about revenge. This was about taking control of a situation where I'd felt powerless for too long. This was about making sure Sarah understood that actions have consequences, that you can't just take from family and expect them to smile and say thank you. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Sarah, we need to talk. Please." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "I'm busy. Talk to your landlord." Then I opened my laptop and started researching mortgage pre-approval applications. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of financial paperwork, property inspections, and sleepless nights second-guessing myself. I liquidated my stock options, took out a small personal loan, and somehow managed to cobble together enough for the down payment plus closing costs. The mortgage application process was stressful. I was stretching my debt-to-income ratio to its limits. But my steady employment history and good credit score worked in my favor. Sarah tried to contact me multiple times during those weeks. Phone calls that went to voicemail, text messages that went unanswered, even an attempted ambush at my apartment that I avoided by pretending not to be home. I wasn't ready to talk to her yet. I wanted to close on the property first, wanted to have all the power in my hands before we had our inevitable confrontation. On a gray Thursday morning in November, I sat in a lawyer's office signing what felt like hundreds of documents, officially becoming the owner of 247 Maple Street. Harold Brennan was there too, a frail man in his 70s who seemed genuinely sad to be selling the building he'd owned for over 3 decades. "Take good care of her," he said, shaking my hand after the last signature was complete. "That building has been good to me, and the tenants are all good people, especially that young lady with the coffee shop. She's got a real gift for bringing community together." I nodded, trying not to think about how Harold's assessment of Sarah's character might change if he knew the full story. When I walked out of that office, keys to the building heavy in my pocket, I felt a mixture of triumph and terror that I'd never experienced before. I owned a building. I was officially Sarah's landlord, and I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do next. That question was answered for me when I got home and found Sarah sitting on my apartment steps, her eyes red from crying. "Congratulations," she said, her voice flat with exhaustion. "I heard the sale went through today." I looked down at her, this sister who had once been my closest friend, who had taken my dreams and built her own success on their remains, who was now at my mercy in a way that neither of us could have imagined just a month ago. "We should talk," I said, unlocking my door. And finally, after months of avoidance and resentment and carefully controlled anger, we did. Sarah followed me into my apartment, her movements careful and hesitant, like she was entering a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. I gestured toward the couch, but she remained standing by the door, her arms wrapped around herself in a defensive posture I'd never seen her adopt before. "So," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you're my landlord now." "I am." I set my keys on the kitchen counter, the metallic sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "How does it feel, Sarah? Being on the other side of a power dynamic you can't control?" She flinched like I'd slapped her. "Marcus, I know you're angry." "Angry?" I turned to face her, and whatever she saw in my expression made her take a step back. "Angry doesn't even begin to cover what I'm feeling right now. I'm furious. I'm betrayed. I'm exhausted from months of watching you build your dream business on the ashes of mine while pretending like my sacrifice meant nothing." "That's not true," Sarah said, tears starting to well up in her eyes. "Your sacrifice meant everything to me. It still does." "Really? Then where's my money, Sarah? Where's the repayment plan we never discussed? Where's the acknowledgement that you took $43,000 from me and used it to build a life I'll never be able to afford?" Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. "Do you know what I found out when I researched your lease agreement? You're paying $2,100 per month in rent. That's $2,200 per year. With the money I gave you, you could run your business for nearly 2 years without selling a single cup of coffee. No wonder you weren't worried about paying me back. You had a bigger cushion than you ever let me know." "The money didn't all go to rent," Sarah said defensively. "There were equipment costs, inventory, permits, insurance." "Bullshit." The word came out harder than I'd intended, but I was past caring about civility. I saw your business plan, remember? I know what you budgeted for each category. And I know that the actual rent was significantly lower than what you told me you'd need. So, where did the extra money go, Sarah? The new car? The designer clothes? The expensive dinners you've been posting on social media? Sarah's composure finally cracked completely. She sank onto my couch, her face in her hands, sobbing in a way that would have broken my heart 6 months ago. Now, it just made me feel tired. You're right, she said through her tears. You're absolutely right about everything. I lied to you about the costs. I spent money on things I didn't need. I convinced myself that I deserved a little comfort after working so hard to get the business off the ground, and I told myself I'd pay you back once things really took off. But you never intended to pay me back, I said. Not really. You thought of it as a family gift, didn't you? Something I was supposed to give you out of love. No strings attached. Sarah looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. I don't know, she whispered. Maybe I did think that, somewhere deep down. Maybe I thought that since you were my brother, since we're family, the money would just belong to both of us somehow. The honesty in her admission hit me like a physical blow. Part of me had been hoping she'd deny it, that she'd have some explanation that would make sense of everything. But hearing her confirm what I'd suspected all along, that she'd never really seen my sacrifice as a loan that needed to be repaid, made something cold and hard settle in my chest. Well, congratulations, I said, my voice flat. Now you get to find out what it feels like when family decides that your success is conditional on their approval. Sarah's head snapped up. What do you mean? I walked over to my kitchen table and picked up a folder I'd prepared earlier that week. Inside were copies of her lease agreement, documentation of her payment history, and a letter I'd had my lawyer draft outlining new terms and conditions. Your lease is up for renewal in 4.5 years, I said, handing her the folder. When that time comes, you'll have a choice. You can pay me back the $43,000 you borrowed, with interest calculated at 5% annually, which comes to about $58,000 total, or you can find a new location for your business. Sarah stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. Marcus, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious. You wanted to treat family money like it didn't need to be repaid? Fine. Now you get to deal with the consequences of that choice. But 4.5 years from now, the business might not have that kind of cash flow available, Sarah said, her voice rising in panic. $58,000 is a huge amount, and finding another location with the same foot traffic, the same character, it could destroy everything I've built. Then I guess you should start planning ahead, I said. You're a smart businesswoman, Sarah. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Sarah set the folder down on the coffee table like it was contaminated. This is crazy, Marcus. This is vindictive and petty, and it's going to destroy our relationship forever. Our relationship was already destroyed, I replied. The moment you decided that my dreams were worth less than your comfort, the moment you stopped seeing my sacrifice as something that deserved gratitude and started seeing it as your right. That's not how I saw it, Sarah protested. You never thought about me at all, I interrupted. That's the problem. You never once asked how I was doing without the car I'd dreamed of owning for 18 years. You never asked if I was okay with indefinitely postponing my goals so you could achieve yours faster. You just took what you needed and expected me to be happy about it. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah sat on my couch, staring at her hands, while I stood by the window looking out at the parking lot where my practical, soulless sedan sat in the space where I'd once imagined parking a Highland Green Mustang. I was grateful, Sarah said finally, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear her. I am grateful. I just didn't know how to express it without acknowledging how much I'd taken from you. And I was scared that if I really faced what I'd done, I'd feel too guilty to enjoy any of my success. I turned back to look at her. So you chose to ignore it instead. You chose to pretend like everything was fine while I sat in family dinners listening to everyone praise your achievement, built on my sacrifice, without a single acknowledgement of what it cost me. I'm sorry, Sarah whispered. Marcus, I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't give me back 18 years of dreaming, I said. Sorry doesn't give me back the car I'll probably never be able to afford now. Sorry doesn't make up for months of feeling like my own family sees me as a walking ATM instead of a person with my own hopes and goals. Sarah was crying again, but quietly this time, tears streaming down her face as she absorbed the weight of what I was saying. What can I do? she asked. How can I make this right? I looked at her for a long moment. This person who had been my closest confidant for most of my life, who had shared my secrets and supported my dreams until the moment those dreams became inconvenient for her own plans. You can accept the terms in that folder, I said. You can spend the next 4.5 years figuring out how to pay me back, and you can learn to live with the consequences of treating family like they exist solely for your benefit. And if I do all that? Sarah asked. If I pay you back with interest, if I prove that I can honor my commitments, will you forgive me? Will we be able to repair our relationship? It was a fair question, and one I'd been wrestling with since the moment I'd decided to buy the building. The truth was, I didn't know. The betrayal ran too deep. The resentment had taken too strong a hold. But looking at Sarah now, seeing her finally understand the magnitude of what she'd done, I felt something shift inside me. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe, but first, you need to prove that you understand what it means to honor a commitment to family. You need to show me that my dreams and sacrifices matter as much to you as your own success. Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. The terms in the folder, they're non-negotiable, completely non-negotiable. She picked up the folder again, flipping through the pages with the focused intensity of someone reading the terms of their own surrender. 5% interest is actually pretty fair, she said after a few minutes. Market rate for personal loans is usually much higher. I'm not trying to ruin you, Sarah. I'm trying to teach you that actions have consequences, that you can't just take from people who love you and expect them to smile and say it was a gift. Sarah closed the folder and looked up at me. I'll do it, she said. I'll pay you back every penny with interest, and I'll spend every day for the next 4.5 years proving to you that I understand what I did wrong. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness wash over me. Relief that this nightmare chapter of our relationship might finally have an end date. Sadness that it had come to this at all, that we'd lost so much trust and goodwill, that a legal document was the only way to rebuild what we'd once had naturally. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out a second document from the folder. I want you to sign this acknowledgement that the original $43,000 was a loan, not a gift. I wanted in writing that you understand you took money from me under the pretense of borrowing it, and that repayment was always expected. Sarah took the document without protest and signed it immediately. Anything else? Actually, yes. I walked over to my laptop and opened a browser window I'd bookmarked earlier that week. I want you to see something. On the screen was a listing for a 1967 Mustang Fastback, Highland Green, just like the one I'd originally planned to buy. The seller was asking $68,000. $25,000 more than I'd had saved originally, a reflection of how classic car prices had continued to climb in the months since I'd given up my dream. This is what I wanted, I said, turning the laptop toward Sarah. This is what I'd been working toward for 18 years, and this is why your promise to pay me back matters so much. Because it's not just about the money anymore, it's about proving that my dreams are worth something to you too. Sarah stared at the photos of the Mustang, and I saw her eyes fill with tears again. But this time, they looked different, less self-pity, more genuine remorse. It's beautiful, she said softly. I can see why you fell in love with it. When you pay me back, I said, plus the interest, that should be enough to buy a car like this. Not the exact same one I lost out on, but something equivalent. And when you do buy it, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger, I want to be there. I want to celebrate with you the way you should have been celebrated when I opened my cafe. I looked at my sister. Really looked at her for the first time in months and saw something I'd almost forgotten was there. Beneath the selfishness and poor decisions, beneath the entitlement and rationalization, there was still the person who had been my closest friend for the first 30 years of my life. We'll see, I said. First, you need to honor your commitment. Then we can talk about celebrations. Sarah stood up from the couch, clutching the folder against her chest like it contained her salvation rather than her obligations. I should go, she said. I have a lot of planning to do. I walked her to the door, and for a moment we stood there awkwardly, two people who had shared a lifetime of easy affection, but no longer knew how to say goodbye to each other. Marcus? Sarah said as she stepped into the hallway. For what it's worth, I think you're going to be a good landlord. Better than I probably deserve. We'll find out, I said. After she left, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat in my living room, staring out the window at the city lights. In 4.5 years, if Sarah honored her commitment, I'd have enough money to buy my dream car. In 4.5 years, we might have rebuilt enough trust to be siblings again instead of landlord and tenant. Or maybe she'd default on the agreement, I'd have to find a new tenant for the cafe space, and we'd never speak again. Maybe this whole elaborate revenge plot would end up costing me more than I'd gained. But for the first time in months, I felt like I had some control over my own destiny. For the first time since I'd sacrificed my dreams for Sarah's benefit, I was in a position to demand that my sacrifices be acknowledged and honored. 6 months later, Sarah made her first installment payment, exactly $1,083.33, representing 1/60th of her total debt, including interest. She delivered it personally, along with a handwritten note that simply said, "Thank you for believing that I can do better." I deposited the check and filed the note away in the folder with her lease agreement. 59 payments to go, 59 months to see if my sister could prove that family means keeping your promises, not just making them. And someday, if she does, I'm going to drive my Highland Green Mustang to her cafe and buy her the most expensive coffee on the menu, because that's what family does. They support each other's dreams, even when the road to get there is longer and more complicated than anyone expected it to be, especially then.